The moving truck arrived on Elm Street early in the morning on April 15, 2019. Margaret Collins watched from her kitchen window as the workers carried box after box into the small two-story house next door. She had lived on Elm Street for 37 years and knew every neighbor by name. The house had been empty for 6 months after old Mr. Peterson passed away. Margaret was curious about who would move into his home. A woman stepped out of a blue Honda Accord and began directing the movers. She looked to be in her 30s with long brown hair tied back in a neat ponytail. She wore jeans and a white t-shirt and seemed very organized. Margaret decided to bake some cookies and introduce herself later that afternoon. The woman's name was Jasmine Pace. When Margaret knocked on her door that evening with a plate of chocolate chip cookies, Jasmine greeted her with a warm smile and bright green eyes. She invited Margaret inside for coffee, even though boxes still filled most of the rooms. "I work as a graphic designer," Jasmine explained as they sat in the kitchen. "I work from home mostly, so I wanted a quiet neighborhood like this one." Margaret found Jasmine to be polite and friendly. She asked thoughtful questions about the neighborhood and seemed genuinely interested in becoming part of the community. When Margaret mentioned that she used to teach at the elementary school, Jasmine's face lit up with interest. "I love children," Jasmine said. "Maybe I can volunteer at the school sometime." Within 2 weeks, Jasmine had settled into life on Elm Street. She kept her lawn perfectly trimmed and planted colorful flowers along her walkway. Every morning at 7 o'clock, she would step outside to water her garden. She always waved to her neighbors who were leaving for work. Tom Bradley lived across the street with his wife, Rebecca. Tom worked as a mechanic and left for work early each morning. He noticed that Jasmine was always outside when he backed out of his driveway. She would smile and wave at him through his car window. "Nice to have someone who cares about keeping up their property," Tom told Rebecca one morning over breakfast. The Turner family lived 2 houses down from Jasmine. David Turner worked at the bank downtown while his wife Lisa stayed home with their 2 young children, Emma and Jake. Lisa often took walks through the neighborhood pushing the baby in a stroller, while Emma rode her bicycle beside them. One afternoon, Lisa was walking past Jasmine's house when she noticed Jasmine working in her garden. Jasmine stood up and brushed the dirt off her hands. "Your children are beautiful," Jasmine said with a genuine smile. "How old are they?" "Emma just turned 5 and Jake is 18 months, Lisa replied. "I hope I can have children of my own someday," Jasmine said softly. "I love being around kids." The 2 women talked for 20 minutes about gardening and the neighborhood. Lisa found Jasmine to be easy to talk with and very interested in hearing about local families and their routines. By summer, Jasmine had become a familiar face around Maple Creek. She volunteered at the animal shelter on Saturdays, spending hours playing with the cats and walking the dogs. The shelter manager, Carol Price, was impressed with Jasmine's dedication. "She has a real way with animals," Carol told the other volunteers. The scared ones seemed to trust her right away. Jasmine also joined the neighborhood book club that met once a month at the community center. The group was made up of 8 women who had been meeting for several years. They welcomed Jasmine warmly and were pleased to have a new member. During their discussion of the monthly book selection, Jasmine always listened carefully to what others said. She rarely shared personal stories about herself, but asked many questions about other members' lives and families. The women found her to be a good listener and a thoughtful person. "She's so interested in everyone else," said group member Patricia Williams. "It's refreshing to meet someone who actually cares about other people." Jasmine made it a point to learn about all her neighbors. She discovered that Kevin Walsh, who lived at the end of the street, was recently divorced and lived alone. She learned that elderly Mrs. Anderson had trouble getting around since her hip surgery. She found out that the Johnson family often left their cat outside overnight. Whenever someone needed help, Jasmine was quick to offer assistance. When Mrs. Anderson's newspaper ended up in her bushes, Jasmine would retrieve it and bring it to her door. When the Johnsons went out of town, Jasmine volunteered to feed their cat. When Kevin Walsh mentioned that his gutters needed cleaning, Jasmine offered to help him with the job. "You're too kind," Kevin told her as they worked together on a Saturday afternoon. "I owe you dinner." "Just being neighborly," Jasmine replied with a smile. Behind her friendly exterior, Jasmine was always watching and learning. She noticed that Kevin's house had no security system and that he often forgot to lock his back door. She observed that Mrs. Anderson took sleeping pills every night and that the Johnsons never closed their garage door completely. She paid attention to everyone's schedules and routines. She knew when people left for work and when they returned home. She knew which houses had teenagers who stayed out late and which families went to bed early. She knew who had visitors regularly and who lived quietly alone. Jasmine had purchased her house with cash, telling neighbors that she had received an inheritance from her grandmother. She said she had moved from Cleveland to get away from the busy city life. Nobody thought to question her story or ask for more details about her past. The truth was that Jasmine Pace was not her real name. Her real name was Jessica Palmer, and she had been born in Detroit 34 years earlier. She had lived in 5 different cities over the past 5 years, staying in each place for about 12 months before moving on to somewhere new. In each city, she had been the perfect neighbor, friendly, helpful, and interested in community life. She volunteered for local charities and joined neighborhood groups. People always remembered her fondly after she moved away. They had no idea what had really happened in their communities while she lived there. Now she had chosen Maple Creek as her new home. The quiet suburban neighborhood seemed perfect for her purposes. The people were trusting and welcoming. They were happy to have someone who cared about the community. They had no reason to suspect that their perfect new neighbor was planning something terrible. By October 2019, the leaves on Elm Street had turned golden and red. Jasmine had been living in the neighborhood for 6 months and had become a trusted member of the community. She still maintained her perfect garden and friendly smile, but some neighbors began noticing small changes in her behavior. Margaret Collins was the first to notice something odd. She often stayed up late reading and sometimes looked out her bedroom window before going to sleep. 3 times that month she saw delivery trucks at Jasmine's house well after midnight. The trucks would back into Jasmine's driveway and men would carry large boxes into her garage. Strange time to be getting deliveries, Margaret mentioned to her sister during their weekly phone call. Maybe she's getting art supplies for her work. You know how artists can be. Tom Bradley noticed something different too. Every morning, for months, Jasmine had been outside watering her plants when he left for work. But recently, her garage door stayed closed all the time. Even when he saw her car in the driveway, the garage remained shut. One Saturday morning, Tom was washing his car in his driveway when he heard power tools coming from Jasmine's garage. The noise continued for several hours. When it finally stopped, Tom walked over to see if Jasmine needed any help with her project. "Just doing some home improvements," Jasmine said when she answered the door. She didn't invite him inside like she usually did. Tom noticed she looked tired, and there were small scratches on her hands. "If you need help moving anything heavy, just let me know," Tom offered. "Thanks, but I can handle it," Jasmine replied quickly. "I like working alone." The neighborhood book club met in early November. The women gathered at the community center to discuss their latest book selection. Jasmine attended as usual, but she seemed distracted. She kept checking her phone and looking at the clock on the wall. "Everything okay, dear?" asked Patricia Williams. "Yes, just waiting for an important work call," Jasmine explained. She left the meeting 30 minutes early, saying she had a deadline to meet. During the same time, pets in the neighborhood began disappearing. It started with Mittens, the Johnson family's orange tabby cat. The Johnsons had owned Mittens for 4 years, and the cat never wandered far from home. One morning, Mittens was simply gone. "He's never done this before," Mrs. Johnson told her neighbors. "He always comes home by dinner time." The Johnsons put up missing cat posters around the neighborhood. Jasmine offered to help search for Mittens and even printed extra flyers at her own expense. She walked through the streets calling the cat's name and checking under porches and in garages. 2 weeks later, Buddy, Mrs. Anderson's small white terrier, vanished from her fenced backyard. Mrs. Anderson was heartbroken. Buddy had been her companion since her husband died 3 years earlier. The gate was still latched, Mrs. Anderson told Lisa Turner tearfully. Someone must have reached over and taken him. Again, Jasmine was among the first to volunteer for search efforts. She organized a neighborhood meeting to discuss pet safety and suggested everyone be more careful about leaving animals outside alone. Kevin Walsh found the 3rd disappearance particularly disturbing. His neighbor's German Shepherd Max was a large, strong dog who was not easily frightened. Max disappeared from his owner's backyard on a Tuesday night. The dog's chain had been cut with some kind of tool. Who would steal a German Shepherd? Kevin asked Tom Bradley as they discussed the missing pets. Max could bite someone's arm off. Maybe someone is taking them to sell, Tom suggested. People pay good money for dogs like Max. The pet disappearances created worry throughout the neighborhood. Parents started keeping their children closer to home. People began locking their garages and sheds more carefully. Some families decided to keep their pets inside all the time. During this period, Jasmine continued her routine of watching and learning about her neighbors. She had become particularly interested in people who lived alone or had few visitors. She studied their daily patterns with the careful attention of someone planning something important. She learned that Mark Stevens, who lived in the apartment complex behind the neighborhood, jogged through the streets every evening at 6 o'clock. Mark was a quiet young man who worked on computers and rarely talked to anyone. Jasmine had seen him running past her house dozens of times. She also observed Amanda Foster, a nurse who worked night shifts at the hospital. Amanda lived alone in a small house 3 blocks away. She arrived home exhausted every morning around 3:30 and slept most of the day. Amanda had no close neighbors and few friends who visited. Jasmine began timing her own activities around these people's schedules. She would happen to be outside working in her garden when Mark ran by. She would drive past Amanda's house on her way to run errands, always noting whether Amanda's car was home. The basement of Jasmine's house had undergone major changes during her months of late-night deliveries and weekend construction work. What had once been a simple storage area was now something entirely different. Jasmine had installed new lighting, soundproofing materials, and special equipment that served her dark purposes. She had also been busy with another kind of preparation. Using her computer skills, Jasmine researched her potential targets thoroughly. She learned about Mark's work schedule and his lack of close family nearby. She discovered that Amanda had recently ended a relationship and had become isolated from her friends. The missing pets had served a purpose beyond simply removing potential witnesses or obstacles. They had been practice for Jasmine, helping her refine her methods of capture and control. Each animal had taught her something new about managing fear and resistance. By late November, Jasmine felt ready to move beyond animals to more challenging prey. She had chosen her first human target and begun planning the details of his capture. The friendly neighbor who had won everyone's trust was about to reveal her true nature. The people of Elm Street continued their daily lives, unaware that someone among them was preparing to commit terrible crimes. They trusted Jasmine completely and had no reason to suspect that their helpful neighbor was actually a predator who had been studying them for months, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. Mark Stevens finished his work at 5:30 on Friday, November 15, 2019. He closed his laptop and stretched his arms above his head. Working from home as a software developer meant he spent most days alone in his small apartment. The only time he left was for groceries and his evening runs through the neighborhood. Mark was 28 years old and had moved to the area 2 years earlier for a job that later became remote work. He had few friends in town and rarely spoke to his neighbors. His parents lived in California and he called them once a week. Most people wouldn't notice if Mark disappeared for several days. At 6 o'clock, Mark put on his running shoes and headed outside. The November air was cool and crisp. He followed his usual route through the apartment complex parking lot, then into the Elm Street neighborhood. The route was 3 miles long and took him about 30 minutes to complete. Mark had seen the friendly woman from Elm Street many times during his runs. She was always working in her garden or washing her car when he jogged past. She would wave and smile at him. He had never stopped to talk to her, but she seemed like a nice person. Today, Jasmine was waiting for him. She had studied Mark's running schedule for 2 months. She knew he ran at the same time every day and always took the same path. She knew he lived alone and worked from home. She knew he had no girlfriend and few close friends. Mark was the perfect choice for her first human victim. Jasmine had parked her Honda Accord behind the community center, away from the main road. She raised the hood and scattered some tools around the engine. When she heard Mark's footsteps approaching on the sidewalk, she began her performance. "Excuse me," she called, out as Mark jogged past. "I'm sorry to bother you, but could you help me? My car won't start and my phone is dead." Mark stopped running and walked over to where Jasmine stood beside her car. He was breathing hard from his run, and sweat covered his forehead. Jasmine looked distressed and worried. "What seems to be the problem?" Mark asked, wiping his face with his shirt. "It just died while I was driving," Jasmine explained. "I pulled over here and now it won't start at all. I was hoping you might know something about cars." Mark wasn't a mechanic, but he was a kind person who wanted to help. He walked closer to the car to look at the engine. As he leaned over the hood to examine the motor, Jasmine moved quietly behind him. She had been holding a metal pipe behind her back. In one quick motion, she swung the pipe hard against the back of Mark's head. The blow knocked him unconscious immediately. His body fell forward against the car and then slid to the ground. Jasmine looked around quickly to make sure no one had seen what happened. The area behind the community center was empty and dark. She had chosen this location carefully because it was isolated from the main roads and neighborhood houses. Working quickly, Jasmine opened the back door of her car and dragged Mark's unconscious body inside. She covered him with a blanket she had brought for this purpose. Then she closed the hood of her car, gathered her tools, and drove home to Elm Street. The whole incident had taken less than 10 minutes. Jasmine backed her car into her garage and closed the door. She waited several minutes to make sure Mark was still unconscious before moving him. When she was certain he wouldn't wake up, she dragged his body through the door that connected her garage to her basement. The basement had been completely transformed since Jasmine moved in. What had once been an ordinary storage area was now something much more sinister. The walls were covered with soundproofing material that would prevent any noise from reaching the neighbors. Bright lights hung from the ceiling. Cameras were mounted in each corner of the room. In the center of the basement was a large metal table with leather straps attached to each corner. Along one wall stood a cabinet filled with various tools and instruments. A computer desk sat in another corner with monitors that showed feeds from the cameras. Jasmine had spent months preparing this room for her dark purposes. She had researched and purchased specialized equipment. She had tested the soundproofing to make sure no screams would escape. She had planned every detail of what would happen in this room. Mark began to wake up several hours later. His head throbbed with pain and he felt confused and dizzy. As his vision cleared, he realized he was lying on a cold metal table. His arms and legs were held down by leather straps that he couldn't break free from. The room was bright white and completely silent. Mark tried to call for help, but his voice came out as a weak whisper. His throat was dry and his head felt like someone had hit it with a hammer. "You're awake," said a woman's voice from somewhere in the room. "I was wondering when you would come around." Mark turned his head and saw Jasmine sitting at a computer desk, typing on a keyboard. She looked calm and relaxed, as if nothing unusual was happening. "What is this place?" Mark asked weakly. "Why am I here?" "You're here because I chose you," Jasmine replied without looking away from her computer screen. "You're going to be part of my research." "Research? What kind of research? Please let me go. I won't tell anyone about this." Jasmine finally turned to look at Mark. Her green eyes were cold and showed no emotion. "I'm studying human behavior under extreme stress. I want to see how people react when they face their worst fears." Mark felt terror rise in his chest. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to ordinary people like him. "Please," he begged. "I have money. I can pay you whatever you want. Just let me go home." "Money isn't what I want," Jasmine said calmly. "What I want is to watch what happens to you over the next few days." For 6 days, Mark remained trapped in Jasmine's basement. She fed him small amounts of food and water to keep him alive, but weak. She conducted various experiments on his mind and body, carefully documenting his responses with her cameras and written notes. Mark's absence from the outside world went completely unnoticed. His remote work meant no one expected to see him at an office. He had no close friends who would worry if he didn't return their calls. His weekly phone call to his parents wasn't scheduled until the following Sunday. On the 6th day, Jasmine decided her research with Mark was complete. She had learned everything she wanted to know about how he responded to fear, pain, and hopelessness. Now it was time to dispose of the evidence and begin planning for her next victim. Mark Stevens was found dead on November 28, 2019, in a wooded area 20 miles from Maple Creek. A hunter discovered his body while tracking deer through the forest. The police report listed the cause of death as exposure and dehydration. There were no obvious signs of violence and no immediate suspects. Detective Ray Johnson investigated the case but found few clues. Mark had no enemies and lived a quiet life. His car was found abandoned in a parking lot across town. Security. Cameras in the area had been broken for months. The investigation went nowhere and was eventually moved to the cold case files. Back on Elm Street, Jasmine continued her normal routine. She attended the December book club meeting and helped organize a holiday food drive for local families. Nobody connected the friendly neighbor to the missing software developer, who had been found dead in the woods. Jasmine had learned valuable lessons from her experience with Mark. She realized she needed to be more careful about choosing victims and disposing of evidence. She also discovered that she enjoyed the feeling of complete control over another person's life and death. During the winter months, Jasmine began planning her next crime. She wanted someone who would provide a greater challenge than Mark had. She also wanted to expand her research into different types of fear and psychological stress. Amanda Foster worked as a nurse at Mercy General Hospital. She was 31 years old and worked the night shift in the emergency room. Amanda lived alone in a small house about 10 blocks from Elm Street. She had recently broken up with her boyfriend and had become isolated from most of her friends. Jasmine had been watching Amanda for months. She knew that Amanda arrived home exhausted every morning around 3:30. She knew Amanda often forgot to lock her doors and windows. She knew Amanda took sleeping pills to help her rest during the day after her long shifts. On February 8, 2020, Jasmine put her plan into action. At 3:15 in the morning, Jasmine called Amanda's house from a disposable phone. When Amanda answered, Jasmine disguised her voice to sound panicked and upset. "Is this Amanda Foster, the nurse?" Jasmine asked quickly. "Yes, this is Amanda. Who is this?" "My name is Carol. I live on Elm Street. My elderly neighbor has collapsed and isn't breathing. The ambulance is taking too long to get here. Can you please come help? I know you're a nurse." Amanda was tired after her 12-hour shift, but she couldn't ignore someone who needed medical help. She grabbed her medical bag and drove to the address Jasmine had given her. The address was Jasmine's house, but Amanda didn't know that. When 18, Amanda knocked on the front door. Jasmine answered immediately. She looked distressed and led Amanda quickly toward the back of the house. "He's in the basement," Jasmine explained. "He fell down the stairs and hit his head. I think he's having trouble breathing." Amanda followed Jasmine down the basement stairs carrying her medical bag. When she reached the bottom of the steps, she saw that the basement looked nothing like a normal home basement. The walls were white and covered with strange materials. Bright lights hung from the ceiling. Cameras were mounted in the corners. "What is this place?" Amanda asked, turning around quickly. But Jasmine was already behind her with a stun gun. She pressed the device against Amanda's back and activated it. The electrical shock caused Amanda to lose control of her muscles and fall to the floor. Before Amanda could recover, Jasmine injected her with a sedative that made her unconscious. When Amanda woke up, she found herself strapped to the same metal table where Mark had been held captive. Her medical training helped her stay calm even, though she was terrified. She tried to think of ways to escape or signal for help. "You're awake," Jasmine said from her computer desk. "Welcome to my laboratory." "You're sick," Amanda said firmly. "You need help. Let me go and I'll make sure you get the treatment you need." Jasmine laughed. "I don't need treatment. I need test subjects, and you're going to be much more interesting than my last visitor." For 9 days, Amanda remained trapped in Jasmine's basement prison. Jasmine subjected her to various psychological experiments designed to study fear, hope, and despair. She would give Amanda small amounts of food, and then, "Take it away." She would tell Amanda she was going to be released, then change her mind. Amanda's medical knowledge helped her understand some of what was happening to her body and mind. She tried to resist Jasmine's psychological games, but the constant stress and uncertainty wore her down over time. Jasmine kept detailed records of everything she did to Amanda and how Amanda responded. She took photographs and videos. She wrote long notes about Amanda's behavior and reactions. She treated Amanda like a laboratory rat rather than a human being. During this time, Amanda's absence from work was noticed but not immediately investigated. The hospital assumed she was sick with the flu that was going around. Amanda lived alone and had few close friends, so nobody checked on her at home. On February 17th, Jasmine decided her research with Amanda was complete. She had learned new things about how medical professionals handle extreme stress differently than other people. She had also perfected her methods of psychological manipulation. Amanda's body was found 3 days later in a different location from where Mark had been discovered. Again, the cause of death appeared to be exposure and dehydration. Detective Johnson investigated this case too, but found no connection to Mark's death. Back on Elm Street, Jasmine began planning her next victim. She had discovered that she enjoyed the psychological games more than the physical aspects of her crimes. She wanted to find someone who would provide even more interesting challenges for her twisted research. The people of Maple Creek continued their daily lives, unaware that a serial killer lived among them. Jasmine maintained her perfect neighbor facade while secretly planning more terrible crimes in her basement laboratory. By spring 2020, 3 more people had fallen victim to Jasmine's twisted experiments. Each disappearance happened weeks apart, giving Jasmine time to plan and prepare between crimes. She had become more confident and more careful with each new victim. Robert Martinez was a 45-year-old accountant who lived alone in a downtown apartment. He worked late hours during tax season and rarely socialized with others. Jasmine lured him to her house by pretending to need help with her business taxes. Robert spent 11 days in her basement before Jasmine decided her research was complete. Maria Thompson was a 29-year-old substitute teacher who had recently moved to town. She knew few people in the area and lived in a small rental house by herself. Jasmine approached her at the grocery store, claiming to be organizing a welcome party for new residents. Maria disappeared on a Tuesday evening and was held for 8 days. Frank Morrison was 67 years old and had been widowed for 2 years. He lived alone in a house near the edge of town and spent most of his time reading and watching television. Jasmine contacted him by phone, saying she represented a senior services organization. She convinced him to meet her at what she claimed was a community center. Frank survived 13 days in Jasmine's basement. Each victim taught Jasmine something new about human psychology and behavior. She learned how different types of people responded to isolation, fear, and false hope. She discovered which techniques worked best for breaking down mental resistance. She perfected her methods of psychological torture. The bodies were found in different locations throughout the Tri-County area. Each death appeared to be caused by exposure and dehydration. The victims showed signs of having been held captive for extended periods, but there were no obvious clues about where they had been kept or who was responsible. Detective Sarah Mitchell had recently transferred to the state police from a department in Columbus. She was assigned to review several unsolved missing persons cases, including the deaths of Mark Stevens and Amanda Foster. Detective Mitchell had experience with serial crime cases and noticed patterns that others had missed. All the victims had been found in remote wooded areas. All showed similar signs of prolonged captivity. All had been missing for over a week before their bodies were discovered. Most importantly, all had last been seen in or near the Maple Creek area. Detective Mitchell began mapping the locations where bodies had been found. She also researched the victims' backgrounds and final activities. A pattern began to emerge that suggested the crimes were connected and that the perpetrator was someone local to the Maple Creek community. Meanwhile, Jasmine's neighbors were beginning to notice more strange things about their friendly neighbor. The unusual deliveries to her house continued to arrive at odd hours. The chemical smells from her property became stronger during certain weather conditions. Her garage remained constantly closed, even when her car was clearly inside. Rebecca Bradley mentioned her concerns to her husband Tom one evening over dinner. "There's something different about Jasmine lately," she said. "I've seen weird lights in her basement windows late at night. And that smell that comes from her yard sometimes makes me feel sick." Tom had noticed things too, but he didn't want to seem paranoid. "Maybe she's just working on art projects," he suggested. "You know how creative people can be with their hobbies." But Rebecca wasn't convinced. She had also noticed that Jasmine seemed to know a lot about people's personal lives and daily routines. During casual conversations, Jasmine would mention details about neighbors that seemed too specific and personal. Lisa Turner had a similar conversation with her husband David. "Jasmine always asks so many questions about our family," Lisa said. "She wants to know when the kids go to bed, when we go out, when we're going to be away from home. It feels like she's gathering information for some reason." David suggested that Jasmine was probably just trying to be a good neighbor. "She's always been helpful and friendly," he reminded Lisa. "Maybe she's just interested in the community." But several neighbors were beginning to feel uncomfortable around Jasmine. Her questions seemed too detailed and her interest in their personal lives felt invasive. Some people started avoiding long conversations with her and being more careful about what information they shared. Detective Mitchell's investigation took a major step forward when she discovered that similar disappearances had occurred in other cities where someone matching Jasmine's description had lived. She found reports from Cleveland, Toledo, and Akron that described missing persons cases with identical patterns. In each city, the disappearances had started about 6 months after a woman named Jessica Palmer had moved to the area. The woman was always described as friendly and helpful. She always became involved in community activities. And she always moved away shortly after the last victim was found. Detective Mitchell realized she was dealing with a serial killer who had been operating for years across multiple jurisdictions. The killer was smart enough to move frequently and careful enough to avoid leaving obvious evidence. But the pattern of behavior was consistent enough to connect the crimes. Armed with this new information, Detective Mitchell began focusing her investigation on the Maple Creek area. She studied recent residents who matched the profile of previous suspects. She looked for people who had moved to town around the time the disappearances began. One name that appeared in her research was Jasmine Pace. The woman had moved to Elm Street in April 2019, just months before the first local disappearance. She had paid cash for her house and had no verifiable employment history in the area. Her background seemed too perfect and too vague. Detective Mitchell decided to conduct surveillance on Jasmine Pace. She wanted to observe the woman's behavior and look for anything suspicious. She also planned to research Jasmine's background more thoroughly to see if she could connect her to the previous cities where similar crimes had occurred. The investigation was getting closer to the truth, but Jasmine had no idea that law enforcement was watching her. She continued planning her next victim, unaware that her years of careful preparation and execution were about to come to an end. The web of evidence was tightening around Jasmine Pace, but she remained confident that she could continue her terrible crimes without being caught. She had no way of knowing that Detective Mitchell was building a case that would soon expose her true identity and bring her reign of terror to an end. Tyler Brooks was a 22-year-old college student who worked part-time at a local coffee shop. He was studying computer science at the community college and lived in a small apartment near campus. Tyler was friendly and outgoing, but he often walked alone at night after his evening classes. Jasmine had been watching Tyler for several weeks. She liked that he was young and physically strong, which would make him more challenging to control than her previous victims. She also wanted to study how someone from a younger generation would respond to her psychological experiments. On August 11, 2020, Jasmine put her plan into action. She waited outside the coffee shop where Tyler worked, pretending to have car trouble in the parking lot. When Tyler finished his shift at 9 o'clock, she called out to him for help. "Excuse me," she said as Tyler walked toward his car. "I'm so sorry to bother you, but my car won't start and my phone battery died. Could you help me figure out what's wrong?" Tyler was tired after a long day of work and classes, but he was a kind person who wanted to help. He walked over to where Jasmine stood beside her Honda Accord. As he leaned over to look at the engine, Jasmine struck him with her metal pipe. But Tyler was younger and stronger than her previous victims. The blow stunned him, but didn't knock him unconscious completely. As Jasmine tried to drag him toward her car, Tyler began to fight back. "Help me!" Tyler shouted as loud as he could. "Someone help me!" Jasmine panicked. Her previous attacks had gone smoothly, but Tyler's resistance was creating problems she hadn't planned for. She hit him again with the pipe, this time harder. Tyler fell to the ground, but remained partially conscious. Jasmine managed to get Tyler into her car and drive him back to her house. But she knew the attack had been messy and loud. Someone might have heard Tyler's calls for help. She would need to be extra careful with this victim. In her basement, Tyler regained consciousness more quickly than Jasmine expected. His head throbbed with pain, but his mind was clear enough to understand that he was in serious danger. Unlike her previous victims, Tyler had grown up in an era of crime shows and news stories about serial killers. He understood what was happening to him. "You're making a mistake," Tyler told Jasmine calmly. "People know where I am. My girlfriend is expecting me to call her tonight. When I don't show up for work tomorrow, people will start looking for me." Jasmine laughed. "That's what they all say at first. But nobody is going to find you here." Tyler had lied about having a girlfriend, but he was telling the truth about people expecting to see him. He was supposed to work at the coffee shop the next day, and he had a study group meeting tomorrow evening. Unlike Jasmine's previous victims, Tyler had a more visible presence in the community. For 3 days, Tyler remained trapped in Jasmine's basement. But instead of breaking down under her psychological torture, he grew stronger and more determined to escape. He studied the room carefully, looking for weaknesses in his restraints or opportunities to break free. On the third night, Tyler managed to work one of his hands loose from the leather strap that held it down. Jasmine had become overconfident after her previous successes and hadn't checked the restraints as carefully as usual. Tyler spent hours quietly loosening the other straps while pretending to be unconscious. When Jasmine fell asleep at her computer desk around 3 in the morning, Tyler made his move. He slipped out of the remaining restraints and looked around the room for anything he could use as a weapon. He found a heavy metal tool that Jasmine had left on her equipment table. Tyler knew he would only get one chance to escape. He crept quietly toward the stairs that led to the garage, but as he reached the bottom step, Jasmine woke up and saw that he was no longer on the table. "Stop right there," she shouted, grabbing a knife from her equipment cabinet. Tyler didn't stop. He ran up the stairs as fast as he could while Jasmine chased after him. He burst through the door into the garage and then through the garage door that led outside. Jasmine was right behind him, still holding the knife. Tyler ran across Jasmine's front yard and toward the street, screaming for help at the top of his lungs. Several porch lights came on as neighbors heard the commotion. Tom Bradley looked out his window and saw a young man running down the street with blood on his clothes, followed by Jasmine carrying a knife. "Call 911, Tom shouted to his wife Rebecca as he ran outside to help Tyler. Tyler collapsed on Tom Bradley's front lawn, exhausted and injured, but alive. Rebecca Bradley called the police while Tom tried to help Tyler with his injuries. Other neighbors came outside to see what was happening. Jasmine realized her perfect plan had completely fallen apart. She dropped the knife and tried to act confused and innocent. "I don't know what's wrong with him," she told the gathering neighbors. "He broke into my house and attacked me. I was trying to defend myself." But Tyler was conscious and able to tell his story to the police when they arrived. He described being kidnapped and held in Jasmine's basement. He told them about the cameras, the equipment, and the evidence of previous victims. When police searched Jasmine's house, they found exactly what Tyler had described. The basement contained overwhelming evidence of multiple crimes. Photographs showed victims who had been reported missing over the past year. Journal entries detailed Jasmine's psychological experiments. DNA evidence connected her to all 6 previous murders. Detective Sarah Mitchell arrived at the scene within an hour of Tyler's escape. She had been building a case against Jasmine for weeks, but Tyler's testimony and the evidence in the house gave her everything she needed to make arrests. "Jessica Palmer," Detective Mitchell said, as she placed handcuffs on Jasmine. You're under arrest for multiple counts of murder and kidnapping. For the first time since moving to Elm Street, Jasmine's mask of friendliness disappeared completely. She showed no emotion as she was led away in handcuffs. She didn't apologize to her victims' families or show any remorse for her crimes. During questioning, Jasmine spoke about her victims as if they had been laboratory animals rather than human beings. She expressed frustration that her research had been interrupted before she could complete more experiments. Psychological evaluations revealed a complete lack of empathy and a narcissistic personality that viewed other people as objects for her entertainment. The trial began 6 months later. Jasmine was convicted on 6 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of kidnapping. She received 6 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. The judge said her crimes showed a level of cruelty and premeditation that deserved the maximum punishment allowed by law. The people of Elm Street were shocked to learn the truth about their friendly neighbor. Many felt guilty for not recognizing the signs of danger sooner. The neighborhood would never be the same after learning that such evil had lived among them for over a year. Tyler Brooks recovered from his physical injuries, but the psychological trauma took much longer to heal. He became an advocate for crime victims and worked to help other people who had survived similar experiences. His courage in escaping and speaking out had prevented Jasmine from claiming more victims. Detective Mitchell was promoted and continued, working on cold cases involving serial crimes. She used the Jasmine Pace case as an example of how important it is to look for patterns in seemingly unrelated crimes and to trust instincts when something doesn't feel right about a person or situation.